Good afternoon. On behalf of Southern Oregon Climate Action Now, welcome to our 2020 candidate interview series with candidates for the Oregon House, Senate, and County Commissioner. My name is Lori Kaplan. I'm a SOCAN volunteer, and I'm going to be your moderator for this interview. As a tax-exempt 501c3 nonprofit, SOCAN cannot endorse candidates, but we can offer constituents information on where candidates stand on issues related to our mission. The focus of these interviews is therefore limited to questions about climate and the environment. All candidates for the general election have been invited to participate in these interviews, and some have accepted and others have declined. Today we'll be speaking with Alberto Enriquez, a candidate for Oregon House District 6. Thank you, Alberto, for joining us for the session. The format is very simple. We're going to have 2 minutes for a candidate intro, followed by 9 questions that I will read. The candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question and then 2 minutes for closing remarks. To ensure a fair and balanced interview, all candidates receive the questions a week in advance and will be posed exactly the same questions. Also, to ensure fairness, there will be no follow-up questions. Alberto Enriquez, a candidate for Oregon House District 6, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Hi. Yes, I'm Alberto Enriquez, and House District 6, for those of you who may not be aware, basically coincides with Medford. For the past 20 years, we've had Republican representatives who seem to have paid more attention to out-of-state corporations than to hometown interests, and certainly none at all to climate change. Climate change is one of the major reasons I'm running. I'm a grandfather. I have a grandchild that I think the world of. Other people have grandchildren all over the world, and we're leaving them a catastrophic situation, especially if we don't act now. We can't stop what we've started, but we can certainly mitigate it. I'm not an expert on climate change, but I think you've heard from your own Alan Journet that within 30 years at the present rate, which was once considered the worst possible scenario, in 30 years, we'll be Reading here in Medford. By the end of the century, we'll be Bakersfield. If we continue down that path, if we don't immediately start taking action against it, we'll see Oregon lose its signature crops of Doug fir and ponderosa pine. These will become strips of evergreens along the higher points of the Coast Range and the Cascade Range. And what that will do to our water supply, to our wildlife, to our own lifestyle, this cannot be overestimated. We'd be devastated. Right now, climate change is hitting us everywhere we live, if you think about it. Okay, forestry, farming, fisheries, tourism, it's all affected. Outdoor entertainment venues, it's all being hit. This is a huge, very visible tax that nobody counts. We need to do something about eliminating that tax. Thank you.
Thank you, Alberto. Okay, first question. The increasing droughts we've been facing have resulted in frequent and substantial water shortages. Please explain what you think state governments and agencies should do to address the increasingly difficult problems of water availability and water rights.
One thing that's important to remember is that a water right is only a right. It doesn't put a single drop of water in a stream. There are people now who can't get their water rights out of the stream. And why is that? It's because in many areas, only the rights that go clear back to the 19th century can be accommodated because of the long-term drought we've been in. Climate change is definitely affecting that, and our practices need to be modified accordingly. We need to be as efficient as possible as we can be, and we may have to revisit I know people say that water is for whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting in the West. But we may have to risk that fight to accommodate the needs of our communities. However, it's not all dark. One reason that I talk so much about housing in what I wrote for you is that this is a place where we can make tremendous savings. I've seen plans for a tower mixed-use facility in Portland that would have met all its water needs just from clever use of capturing the rain, filtering it for human use, then reusing the gray water, and then purifying it on site and returning it to the Willamette cleaner than it was received from the sky. People just don't realize how much resources we as individuals consume because of our wasteful housing practices. This is a place where we can really dig in on energy and water resources. The quarter-acre lot with the yard that you have to mow all the time, I'm on it. It's what was available when I moved here. It's not sustainable.
Okay, here we go. Stop it. Yeah.
That's your attention.
Right up to 2 minutes there. Okay, number 2, Oregon's Forest Management Practices Act has not been revised for decades. Do you think it should be revised? And if so, how?
Well, I'll be frank. I think our Oregon State University sometimes acts more like a mouthpiece for an industry than for forest science. I think the idea that Doug firs can only grow out of clear cuts, unsupportable by science, I think. I'm not a forester, but I want to see the data that says trees can grow on a hot slope in Southern Oregon if we clear cut, given the amount of water we're getting now and the weather patterns we're seeing, where we don't have, basically our runoff is going to come faster, earlier, and we won't have snowpack to sustain the trees. And that affects also our water table. So even within the Willamette Valley, we're seeing 12 restricted areas for wells. That's incredible to me. As much rain as the Willamette Valley gets, we're already in 12 water restricted districts for wells. So how are the trees going to survive if we don't take on a reasonable policy that says they need some shade, they need water, if the water isn't there, I don't know what we'll do, frankly. I'm not sure that we have a policy that will keep us in trees unless we tackle the major problem first.
Thank you. Third question, Oregon's wildlife management plan has included removal of wolves from the state endangered species list and a proposal to allow bear hunting along the wild and scenic Rogue River. Do you think it's important to conserve Oregon's bears, endangered wolves, and other wildlife species at risk? Please explain why and identify where this ranks in your priority list.
I think where the bears are concerned, it's along specific spots along the wild and scenic Rogue River where they've been attracted by food. The Applegate, I don't think there's a shortage of bears there. I don't think they're endangered. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they're endangered there. Wolves is another story. They've just recently been reintroduced and have managed to begin spreading throughout the state. And should they still be on the endangered list? Perhaps.
Okay, thank you. Okay, given that some segments of Oregon's population suffer more extensively than others from adverse climate impacts and toxic pollution, how should we invest in correcting health and social inequities as part of our response to climate change?
Well, I grew up on the Willamette River. I played in the Willamette River when it was at the height of its most polluted. So I think we all benefit when we see that urban environments are actually livable environments. And yet at that time, the argument was that industry can't get by without this. We have to allow the pulp mills to continue to dump all this waste. We can't afford to go to tertiary treatment of sewage. All these things that came through with the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, and that came through later when we took lead out of gasoline, inner city children's lead levels. Everybody always talked about, oh, they're chewing on the paint. But as soon as we took the lead out of the gasoline, lead levels in inner city children dropped by 30%. So it should have never been there in the first place. In fact, the guy who first proposed it and put it in there died of lead poisoning, which is kind of ironic. But I don't see that as a it's a social equity issue, depending on often on the workforce. Like for instance, the farm workers will shortly be arriving to pick our pears. They'll be exposed to high heat and smoke from these fires. But the solution is global. The solution is that we have to preserve quality environment for everybody. This isn't just something that we're doing for some group that's endangered, or because well-to-do people can live higher up the hill and get a little bit further out of the smoke. No.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. How do you think the state should promote and invest in clean jobs and a green economy as part of our efforts to reboot the economy following the COVID-19 crisis?
Oh, I would love that. And this is someplace where we actually might get some traction next year. In this horrible year of declining revenues, Oregon has a great bond rating, and we could issue green bonds. And the interest rate now is really low. So we have a unique opportunity to fund projects through bonding. In our cities, we routinely allow neighbors, just small groups of neighbors, to fund sidewalk projects in front of their house by latching on to the city's bonding authority. And how much more important is solar than a sidewalk? Well, sidewalks keep your kids safe, no doubt about that. I'm not dissing them. But why not allow a similar project to make solar available to everybody? I really think we could make a huge difference with that, because we didn't pay anything more than the connection fee last week on our house. We put 5.8 kilowatts of panels on here just 4 years ago. Last year, with less smoke and good sunny weather, we actually produced more electricity than we consumed, and that covers our heat pump, which generates all of our electricity down to 35 degrees. Nowadays, if we bought that pump today, it'd be all of our heating, because they're efficient down to 0 degrees now. So it powers up most of the miles on our Prius. It's doable. This is not fantasy. Solar is the most efficient energy today. We need to make it available to everybody as soon as possible, and we can do that. And just imagine what it'll do for installers. This will provide jobs in the Rogue Valley.
Great, thank you so much. Given the consensus among climate scientists that global warming is a reality and human activity is largely responsible, what do you think are Oregon's top 3 or 4 priorities to address the climate crisis?
Well, you know, when I was replying to your queries, I said, let's go for 2035. Let's stop talking about 2045. We don't have that much time. Well, lo and behold, like a week later, Biden came out and said, we can do this in 2035. But I think in the back of his mind, Biden is still thinking nuclear. I've heard that. And I don't think we need to go down that path. Solar is the most efficient and cheapest form of energy we have now, and we have the battery farms to do it. We already know that, because in New South Wales and Australia, Solar City, Elon Musk's other company, built a battery farm that was capable of leveling the demand for an entire state. We can do that. We can do that. So yes, Let's do it by 2035. Let's commit to getting there. Let's attract companies here that are willing to do those things, clean companies that will provide jobs. We desperately need jobs in this valley. Let's get on the leading edge instead of the trailing edge of making this change. My opponent says, oh, anything we do is just not going to accomplish anything. We're indifferent. Well, you can't lead if you don't lead by example. And we definitely need to lead. There's no question about that. This is an existential crisis. We've got oceans that are so acid that shellfish can't form shells. The last time that the ocean flipped its chemistry and went to hydrogen sulfide bacteria instead of blue-green algae, which is also a bacteria, it was catastrophic for all life on Earth. 90% of the life in the ocean died. 75% of the life on land died. Can't go that way. We don't need to go that way. There's a better way. That's like denial is not an option.
Thank you. Do you support Governor Brown's Executive Order 2004, establishing an Oregon Climate Action Plan? What elements of the executive order do you think should be strengthened and how?
I applaud it, but there's only so much you can do with an executive order. And what I would really like to see is for people, it's strange that you have to say this to Americans, I'm Cuban, but hey, free markets work. And the free market version of this is cap and trade. You change the expectation and you reward performance. And like I say, it's like the NBA's three-point line. Everybody thought those were a long shot when they first started with it. But now you'd be surprised to see any game go through without lots of those because you get 50% more. So instead of trying to keep the money and decide how we're going to invest it, let the companies keep that money. You dangle that big carrot and they will follow. And the people who can't meet the expectation right away, they can buy their way out. They're not getting a free pass. They in a well-designed cap and trade system, which only the legislature can do. I'm not dissing Kate Brown in any way. Thank God for Kate Brown. Right now, she's keeping lots of Oregonians alive. But trust free markets to provide this solution. If you structure a free market to reach this goal, then people will head that way. And the people who can't meet it will eventually meet it. Eventually, it all becomes low-hanging fruit.
Thank you. 2 more questions. Fire ecologists argue that climate change is the single greatest contributor to wildfires. What do you think should be done in the short and long term to address the problem of fire and smoke in Southern Oregon?
It's very sad, I have to tell you this, but it's true. I do not have a magic wand. We're paying the price for the sins of the past. One thing that could be done right now is to stop slicking off our lands, but the game is rigged. When Bob Packwood gave Hank Simpson a right to call junk bonds a normal cost of doing business, that resulted immediately in wiping out 300 jobs in Medford because while Medco had been on continuous cut in Butte Falls since the 30s and had more trees at the end than at the beginning, it took Hank Simpson just 3 years to slick it all off and then go back to Houston and be welcomed as a hero because gave $1 million to the local hospital or something like that. No. Right now, under record low interest, we're still facing the same thing. Hank had to cut all the trees fast because he was doing he bought the company at an absurdly high interest rate. But now that we have low interest rates, we see Wall Street coming in and buying up all private land and slicking it off. And then they'll sell it back to us when it's bare. Oregon is an economic colony, and we need to realize that we've been an economic colony, and we need to seize control of our own future. And one way we used to do that was with something called the severance tax, which isn't in play anymore. But we should set that tax so that the trees come off at a sustained yield, or we simply make it too expensive to take those trees off. That's what I think is, let's go for sustained yield. And if you can't prove that you've got a sustained yield under current situations, maybe we shouldn't be cutting them. And maybe we should be looking also at biochar instead of burning things up completely.
Thank you. Last question. Methane is a greenhouse gas 86 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Given the inevitable emissions of methane that would result from the proposed Pembina Jordan Cove LNG export facility and pipeline, please explain where you stand on the project and why you reached that conclusion.
Well, back in the long ago, we used to think, oh, wow, we've got it made. We've got natural gas coming out of our ears. Oregon is like the like the OPEC of methane if we went after the clathrates just offshore. This is natural gas in crystallized form in water. You can hold these crystals in your hand and light them. But we know now that that would be a horrible thing to do because of what you just mentioned of how much more heating it is and the inevitable leakage. And we need to leave fossil fuels in the ground. We've taken too much out. We need to return fossil fuels to the ground in form of biochar, which has an enormous capability of permanently removing carbon from the atmosphere. And I say permanently because when my ancestors went into South America and saw black soils, they thought they were natural, but in fact, the native peoples had made those black soils, and those soils are still black today. That carbon stays in there. So it's not like putting wood in there. Wood rapidly breaks down. Charcoal doesn't. We need to go that route. Instead of the route of putting more carbon into our atmosphere, we need to put it into our soil.
Thank you. And now, Alberto, you can take 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
Okay, one thing I didn't say about why we want to put the carbon into our soil is it will be great for the soil. It will do so much for other things that we're worried off. It will reduce the runoff of fertilizer. You'll need much less fertilizer. It will lock it into place. It becomes like a coral, a subterranean coral, providing spaces for beneficial bacteria to live. Soil is dirt, sand, and then organic material and air and water. And the organic material, the char is so important for holding that organic material there and for all the living organisms part of it. So yeah, imagine a world with cleaner water and less warming air and better crops, and we're getting it all from one intervention, putting carbon into the soil. So yeah, let's go there. Let's go to this new solar biochar world. I want not only my grandchildren, but grandchildren's for many generations to come to have a decent world. And that's an important part of why I'm running. The other things are housing, healthcare, and jobs. And the things I've talked about would help address those too.
Okay, thank you very much. This concludes our interview with Alberto Enriquez, a candidate for Oregon House District 6. Thank you so much, Alberto, for joining us. To those who will be viewing this video in the future, and to Carmen Profit, our volunteer from SOCAN, for driving the technology that made this possible. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.